Diolch yn fawr iawn, Mark, for such a deeply thoughtful and considered lecture tonight. We now have about 20 minutes remaining for questions. We do, I believe, am I correct, have some roving mics? We do. Given the limited time, could I ask that people keep their questions brief and singular? If you have 4 questions for Mark, that's great. Choose the most important one. And we have the translation equipment here, so if anyone wishes to ask a question on a iaith Gymraeg, please feel free. So if we could first of all have the gentleman there. Yes, but please use the microphone. Thank you.
Earlier in the beginning of the lecture, you were saying that you refer to the Lancaster House list of no. And whereas in reality now we're seeing that is somewhat different. What happened? Where is the change come from? What's your opinion about that?
I think 2 things happened. First of all, there has been the pressure on the UK government from that long list of interest groups that I mentioned to you. It is not a great surprise to me that the UK government doesn't listen particularly attentively to the Welsh government, but I am baffled by the fact at how it thinks it has not been willing to listen to its friends in the CBI and in the business community, all of whom have been arguing for many of the things that we have argued for here in Wales. So I think the pressure came on, and I think that made a difference, and the reality came on, and that made the biggest difference of all. Surely the biggest mistake the Prime Minister has made is to trigger Article 50 in the way that she did, without doing any of the thinking and the preparation that we now see being necessary, and without any apparent realisation that once Article 50 is triggered, the power shifts every single day away from the United Kingdom and towards the other side of the table. And the history of 2017 is the dawning realisation on the UK government that if they didn't cut a deal by the end of that year, then the only prospect was of a worse deal still to follow. So I think those 2 things, if I had to choose 2 things, the impact of the pressure that they came under from domestic audiences, the dawning realisation of the difficulties in which they had placed themselves.
We have lots of people interested in asking questions. Let's try and get through as many as possible. Question here at the front first.
Laura McAllister, Wales Governance Centre. Mark, thank you for that really masterful coverage of a very difficult topic, and adding a note of optimism as well. I hope this isn't too parochial, but you talk a lot in the speech about a voice for Wales in the future, whatever that looks like. How confident are you that the apparatus of devolution is fit for purpose to deliver that? It's a very different scenario to that of 1997 when we first created the Assembly. Given this is within the remit of Wales now for the first time, what are your thoughts on what we need to do to change that?
Well, again, I'll just try and make 3 points about what I think needs to be done. The first is just to repeat what I said. One of the heartening and humbling experiences that I feel I've had over the last year and going around to many different parts of Europe is just how willing people are to continue to want to work alongside us. So the first thing we have to do is to do even more than we have in the past to keep those links alive and vibrant. Inside the Assembly, we undoubtedly have a job of work to do in the Welsh Government side to gear ourselves up to be able to do that job. It's very time-consuming, and we're a government, as you know, without a majority, so being away from Cardiff is always difficult when there are votes to be won and so on. So there is a job inside the government for gearing ourselves up to it, and there is a job on the Assembly side as well, because the Assembly will need to revisit the machinery that it has in place to discharge the new responsibilities that come to Wales as a result of Brexit, and to do what it needs to do in order to keep our links with other parts of Europe alive. In the first period of devolution, we had a European committee that focused entirely on matters to do with Europe. In the last 2 Assembly terms, we've not had that, and all committees are meant to take an interest in Europe. I wonder whether, as the realities of Brexit dawns, and we need to think beyond it, and our continuing relationship with Europe, whether the Assembly itself will need to think about recalibrating some of the ways in which it organises itself in order to play its part in sustaining the things that have made such a difference here in Wales.
Thank you. Next question here.
Mr. Drakeford, I speak as a clinical psychologist who worked all my life in the NHS, both here in Wales and in England. And I'm currently, after having seen successive governments hive off and privatise our NHS, now live in fear of the American markets being stepped in post-Brexit. And it seemed, and I realise from what you said, it's all about compromise and negotiation. I understand that, but why, in opposition to the Scottish Government, Scottish Labour and Jeremy Corbyn, are you prepared to hand or devolve powers which were democratically elected by referendum and decided back to the Tories of all people in Westminster? I really don't understand.
Okay. Well, let me try and explain, because what you said was so deeply mistaken about the nature of the agreement that it clearly needs longer explanation to be able to give so. Because let me be absolutely clear with you. We have handed nothing back to the Tories in Westminster. What we have agreed is that in future there may be 24 areas, which we have agreed with Scotland, by the way. They're exactly the same areas that they have agreed, which, with the agreement of the National Assembly, with the agreement, it has to be put to the vote. Every one of these 24 areas will have to be put separately to the vote in the National Assembly. That what the Assembly will be asked to vote on is whether the current European rulebook should continue to apply. That is all we are asking. Not that the Tories will have powers to do anything, simply that the current rules will continue. That's what we are being asked to vote on. And those current rules, the ones we live under now, and many of us campaign to continue to live under, will continue to be in place until we all agree that new frameworks are there to govern the future of the United Kingdom. And that's what we have signed up to. That the current rules continue, they're frozen, and the only way they can be unfrozen is when we all agree that we've got something better in their place. And that's what we have agreed. It is, all the stuff you hear about us handing powers back, that somehow this is undermining devolution, I can tell you it simply does not reflect the nature of the agreement that we have reached. While the powers are in the freezer, nobody can touch them. We can't touch them, Scotland can't touch them, English ministers are not allowed to touch them either. They remain there, the current rules continue until there is an agreement, which the National Assembly will have to vote on. Every time there is an agreement, that will go to the floor of the Assembly to be voted on. And when we agree that we've got something better in place, then we will move ahead. That's what the agreement...
Why did Jeremy Corbyn say...
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Look, this is the nature of devolution. The Scottish position is different.
Sorry, Mark, if I could just follow up on this question. Yeah. The Scottish Labour Party have backed the Scottish Government in saying that the changes to the withdrawal bill are inadequate. So why are Scottish Labour wrong?
Look, you've simply got to understand it in this way. Scotland is in a different position to Wales. People voted in Scotland to stay in the European Union. People in Wales voted to leave the European Union. The context is very different. The powers are different. The nature of the continuity bill is different. If you believe in devolution, you have to be able to believe that people can make decisions that they think are right for them in their context, and other people in different contexts can come to different conclusions. Otherwise, there will be no point in having these things devolved separately to Wales and in Scotland. People in Scotland, sensible people in Scotland, this is what the Scottish Government says. They say that everything that we have agreed in our agreement with the UK Government is substantial progress. Everything we have agreed, they want to apply to them. But for them, in their circumstances, it didn't go quite enough. And so they're in a different position to us there. I wish it could have gone further too. But let's be clear with you on this. The choice on the table was not between what we have agreed to and something better, because there isn't anything better on the table. The choice was between everything that we have negotiated and agreed, with all the defences that it provides, or returning to the original Clause 11, which would have taken everything away from us altogether.
That's fine. I know there's still plenty of people wanting to ask questions, so let's try and get through a few more of them at the back there.
Hi, Mark. My name is Carmen Smith. I'm the current NUS Wales president, and I'm also part of a movement called For Our Future's Sake. And yesterday, we actually published a letter written by 120 student leaders from across the UK who represent around 1 million students calling for a people's vote. And so my question is, will you support young people and students in calling for a people's vote, considering how frustrated they are with the current Brexit negotiations and how they are not being discussed and their futures?
Well, let me start by saying how much I understand the general point you are making about people who feel that their futures have been compromised by decisions taken by people who will not face the same futures themselves. I tried to argue in what I said, and I'll just have to repeat it really, that while a second decision-making point I think is coming, I think it is still in our interests to remain a bit fluid about the best way in which that decision might be taken. And a people's vote may be one way, but there are other ways too. A vote of people through a general election, I could argue, is a preferable means of people expressing their view than on a single-issue referendum. Referenda, as you know, are dangerous devices because they capture a zeitgeist at that moment in which people may vote on all sorts of issues, not simply the one that is on the paper in front of them. And a meaningful vote in Parliament, given the House of Lords amendment, may be a different way in which a second decision-making point could be best navigated. So while I think that point is very important, and I think we're about to reach it, and I think it's absolutely right for people to advocate for whichever form they think will be the most effective way to make that decision, I don't feel that it is sensible from a Welsh Government point of view to box ourselves into a position where we argue for one of the different possibilities that are there, because I think remaining open to different ways in which this could be secured may still in the end be in our interest.
I retain the hope that as a result of the Irish border question, forcing reality into the open later this year, that in the end we will see Britain remaining within the European Union. And my question is based, therefore, on the assumption that we do retain our membership. And at the outset, you were talking about how you would have fought the referendum on the basis of calling for reform of the Union. And I'm interested in what sort of reforms you had in mind. Was it along the lines of your multi-tiered Europe, where the Eurozone would go ahead and the rest of us would be left behind in many ways? Or were you thinking of policies? And there I refer to the fact that since 2014, the European Commission has focused so clearly on jobs and growth and slimmed down legislation.
Thank you. Well, when I talked earlier about a Remain to Reform prospectus, I wasn't talking about a multi-speed Europe, but I was talking about a European Union which pursues an economic policy which is not focused on punishing countries such as Greece and Portugal for the difficulties they have experienced in the post-2008 era. In other words, an approach to economic policy that is designed to try to invest and promote economic growth across the whole of Europe. A solidarity Europe, in which Europe does not regard itself as a fortress against the rest of the world and thinks that the way to solve our social problems is to make it ever more difficult for people from other parts of the world to come to Europe, and a democratic Europe, in which we are not satisfied with the current ways in which people feel that they are able to have their views and their preferences made effective in the decision-making of the current structures of the Union. So in economic, in social and in democratic areas, I think there is a genuine reform agenda for the European Union. You have to be able to create a left-of-centre alliance across the European Union in order to make that reform agenda possible. But I think if we had explained to people more clearly back in 2016 that our prospectus for Europe wasn't just more of the same, not just saying to them, look at a wonderful job Europe has done, let's let it carry on as it is. But if we had said to people, there are fantastic advantages we've had from Europe, but there's many ways in which we can make it more relevant and more effective in your lives, I think we might have captured a few more votes for that proposition.
Thanks, Mark. Question to the back there.
Helen Walby, Federation of Small Businesses. In 10 years' time, do you believe we will still have a United Kingdom or potentially a United Ireland?
Entirely personally, I have come to believe that Northern Ireland leaving the United Kingdom is maybe a more immediate prospect than Scotland leaving the United Kingdom. I mean, the vote in the north of Ireland is very instructive. It voted to remain in the European Union. The vote of moderate Protestants, to use the shorthand, is particularly interesting. And faced with, as the previous questioner put it, if those people are genuinely faced with a choice between remaining in the European Union or remaining in the United Kingdom, if that is put to them in a hard choice type way, then I don't think we should rule out at all that people in the north of Ireland, with all sort of safeguards that could be built in terms of autonomy for the north and all that sort of thing, that people won't decide that that's where their future better lies. And if the United Kingdom continues to operate in the way that it currently does, where intergovernmental relationships are conducted in the way that I've described to you. So if I go to a JMC, only the UK government is able to chair that meeting. Only the UK government is able to provide an agenda for that meeting. Only the UK government is able to put papers on the table to be discussed at that meeting. Only the UK government produces the minutes of that meeting. And that deeply imbalanced way of conducting the United Kingdom, which I think we are eroding slowly, that way will not sustain the United Kingdom into the future. And unless we can persuade others that a different sort of arrangements with genuine parity of esteem between the four nations of the United Kingdom is made a reality in the way we conduct ourselves the other side of the European Union, then the dangers to the United Kingdom, I think, will persist and could easily grow.
Okay. Could I thank all of those of you who've asked such thoughtful questions, and thank Mark for his very considered responses. I know there are still people who would like to ask further questions, but I've just been informed that we're running very short of time.